Our next topic will be presented by Brother Lee Adair, and he's going to talk about the effects of not forgiving and how it affects us. The author, C.S. Lewis, in his book, Mere Christianity, addresses this somewhat when he says something inside us, the feeling of resentment, the feeling that wants to get one's own back, must simply be killed. I do not mean that anyone can decide this moment that he will never feel it anymore. That is not how things happen. I mean that every time it bobs its head up, day after day, year after year, all our lives long, we must hit it on the head. It's hard work, but the attempt is not impossible. Speaking on the topic, the effects of not forgiving, is Brother Lee Adair. Lee lives near Huntsville, Arkansas with his wife Ellen, their 11-year-old daughter Tori Jo, and 7-year-old son Miles. They attend the Aurora congregation there in Huntsville. Brother Adair works full-time in evangelism. Today, Brother Lee Adair presenting on the effects of not forgiving.
Thank you, Brother Mark, for a number of things. A couple things I would change, as about a week ago or a couple days ago when I realized I was speaking, I wouldn't be such a Grinch with the time length for each speaker. And I wouldn't give Brother Mark an option, next time, as he mentioned. I am sad that we don't get to hear Brother JR this morning. He had some thoughts I will incorporate into this. I was looking forward very much to that. I apologize to JR when I gave him this topic because there's no flashlight in this sermon. This is a dark sermon. My job today is not to talk about the bright side of forgiveness. That light will be shined over the course of the next several sermons. Mine is to talk about the ugly side of it. And I hope that you are edified, but I hope you're provoked to thought. I believe that we need to give serious thought. As he ended off talking, Brother Ian did, he's talking about preparing a heart for mercy. I think we need to understand why it's so important to be prepared to be merciful, because of the things that are at risk whenever we're not merciful. Beginning where he ended with this right here, Luke 6:36 and John 8:44, and he contrasted these ideas. Whenever we choose to be merciful, of God, the daughters of God, and we followed His paths. And I believe it's very true what he said, though, when we refuse to be merciful, then we've chosen the followers or the sons and daughters of Satan. I'd like to show that in just a few verses, and in homage to some of the notes that Brother JR put. Next couple will tend to that. In Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 17, he says, "For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you cannot do the things that you would." So we don't start off following, I don't think we set out and going, you know what, I'm going to be the son of Satan today. That's not what we think of in situations of conflict, but what we face is a moment like any other moment in our spiritual life. The battle you face every day is the battle of knowing you want to do right and you want to do good, but then consistently faced with this pull inside of you. A war, Paul said, of your flesh against the Spirit. Forgiveness isn't our first instinct. Our first instinct whenever someone has hurt us and wounded us is to circle our wagons and to prepare for a fight, to defend ourselves. Because that's what every Christian does whenever they're hurt. That's instinct. That's the flesh. That's what Satan hopes that you will do. But the spiritual decision is to be able to step back from the emotion and to make the decision that is righteous. And when we don't, the consequences are dire. Whether it's a decision to do right or wrong in general, or forgive or not forgive, the decision is always can have two outcomes. Romans 8 verse 6, "For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace." And this is true in every situation, but we see it so present in our interpersonal conflict. that if we choose to follow God and if we choose mercy, I'll tell you there's so much life in that. You know, we look at some people and we say they got a lot of life in them. What we mean is vibrancy, right? They have a vibrant life. And I'll tell you, whenever you make the decision to forgive somebody and to be merciful, regardless of the situation or regardless of the pain or the hurt, what you are doing is you're making a decision that will give you a better life. You're making a decision that will give them a better life potentially, and I guarantee you the church a better life because you're following peace. But whenever we choose not to be merciful, we are choosing death. We're choosing death, and we might kill a lot of people along the way, not just ourselves. I'm not talking about running someone off the road with their vehicles or things like that. I'm talking spiritually. When we choose to follow our instincts and not forgive and lash out the way we want to, we're causing a lot of problems for a lot of people. I want to bring it full circle back to that idea that we choose to either follow God or to follow Satan. This is a passage we use very often. I think we use it wrongly as a crutch in some ways. Ephesians 4, verses 26 through 27, he said, "Be ye angry and sin not, and let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to that." I'll tell you what we do a lot of times. We give ourselves allowances. We tell people, just give me a little bit of time. And we think, I got at least till the end of the day to calm down a little bit, right? Give me some time. And I don't think what he's doing here is giving us allowance to say, you know what, give it time. Time is not going to fix your wrath. In fact, I believe time will make your anger worse, your grudge worse. We look at the concepts that Jesus taught in Matthew 18 and Matthew 5, especially Matthew 5. He said, even if you're going to worship, leave your gift at the altar and go be reconciled. Take care of it quick. Why? Because in those moments where we're angry at the beginning, that's the opportunity to choose the flesh or choose the spirit. And that's the opportunity that Satan has to say, come with me. Come with me. You know what? He hurt you. You know what? He should pay. You know what? There is nothing he could do to fix this. You know what? I need to tell everybody else about this. I can't believe they did it. I need somebody to go through this with me. And so we go and we team build and we do all kinds of things because we've allowed Satan to have our... And we listen and we follow him like a sheep to the slaughter. And blood begins to pour. I'll tell you, you can't stand up to your anger. I think I can cover a lot of things with love, but I just can't cover. We're so much weaker than we think we are as humans. There is a reason why he said, go gain your brother. There's a reason why that's a pattern. Because I am not as strong as I think that I am. And neither are you. The proverb says in chapter 27, verse 4, wrath's cruel, anger's outrageous, who can stand before envy? Outrageous there, if you look at the ESV, he said, they translate it as overwhelming. The true definition is a deluge or a flood, and anger is like that. I think that I can hold my anger off and I can get over things without really working through. But I don't know if you've ever been in a flood. I've been in a flood before. It's been a long time. 12 years old, me and my dad and my brother were caught in a flash flood. I remember very clearly as water hit us, and we were swept underwater, and there's logs and rocks, and I had every intention, brothers and sisters, of holding my breath whenever I was forced under the water. You know why? Because I knew it was life and death. We know in these situations it's life or death not to let anger get the best of it. It's not about not knowing. But under the water, you try to hold your breath, but you know what happens is the water finds a way in. You can only hold your breath so long. And that's what a flood does. It works its way to every nook and cranny, to every area. And it will work its way into every aspect of your life. It'll work its way into the way that you think and the way that you talk and the way that you interact, not just with the people who wounded you, but with everyone else. It will overwhelm you, and it has to be dealt with. I can think of no better story in the Bible to illustrate that to us than the story of Saul's grudge against David. I know David didn't really wrong Saul, but how many times have people not really wronged us and we've perceived it? Whether he perceived it or it was a real hurt, Saul refused to be merciful. He had a grudge, and it consumed his life. You remember how it all started? I mean, I know his life was on a pretty rough track anyways, but you get back there in 1 Samuel 15, 16, and what you start seeing in that situation is that David starts making his rise to the front by fighting battles against the Philistines, ones that the time, and he was let others fight. But then as they start through the streets in 1 Samuel 18, they start singing songs that give Saul has killed his thousands, but the women start chanting, but David's killed it 10,000s. And in verse 8 he says, what more could they give this man? I'm the king. I'm the leader. What about me? All they got to do is just hand him the keys. And so the scripture says something I think that is interesting in verse 9. He says, Saul eyed David from that day forward. I'll tell you that I think this is a very fitting way to put it. Because from the day you choose not to be merciful, your life will change. And Saul's life, even though it was on a rough path, it definitely got a lot worse. It was a vortex of awful. And I want to bring up a couple of the situations, the things that will happen to you as someone who chooses not to forgive and the effects it'll have on you. You know, one of the first things that he did is very similar to us. One of the first things he tried to do, we see in verse 13, it said Saul removed him from his presence. It thought that David would be a good captain, though he would. He just said, you know what, I'm going to deal with this. I don't want to look at him. I can't stand to be around him. So instead of doing it, just get him out of my sight. And some of us might sit back and go, well, that's better than throwing a javelin at his head. And that way, but it doesn't work that way. Remember, time doesn't heal. The process of God heals. Mercy heals. And all he had whenever he was out of the presence of that man was time to stew even more. It did not work. We try to do that, though. I'll just avoid them. I'll just avoid them, or, you know what, I'll be nice when I have to see them, but you know, I love them, but I ain't got to like them. We practice that old fake golden rule. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. I'll just smile and wave, you know, and we'll keep moving forward. I want to ask you a question. How hard are you going to have to work at it to avoid somebody that you go to church with? It's going to take a lot of work. I mean, I know a lot of our congregations are about this size. The building ain't that big. I can see you pretty clear across the room, even though I'm, you know, not real good at this old seeing game without my contacts. And I'll tell you, when you're harboring a grudge and you see that other person, what happens, those feelings well up again. What we're doing is violating. We're violating Matthew 18, where Jesus said, if thy brother has offended thee, go and tell him between him alone and gain your brother, right? Go, but I'm saying, no, instead of going to him, I'm just going to give. Well, and I'll tell you, people avoid until they avoid the church altogether, not just the one person. So many people leave because they're not willing to deal with their problems. That's going to be a thing I'm probably going to say way too often this morning, because that's what happens. You can't stand before your unforgiveness. It will destroy you. You can't avoid the brethren enough to be able to get over the hurt. Another thing that he did that we see is he became more and more paranoid. I think that's a pretty good description for him. And I want to use this in a way that maybe you may not normally think of in paranoia, but we see in this particular passage that that Saul has actually sent David out. And he said, look, I'll give you another one of my daughters. He's already taken one away that he'd promised to give him. And then he says, I'll give you another my daughter, but you need to go out. The dowry is going to be you killing 100 Philistines. So David goes, he said, I can do that. So he goes out, he kills 200 Philistines. He goes above and beyond to try to honor Saul, the father of this woman. And then he comes back and he does it, and is Saul happy? No, he said, he's thinking the Philistines will take care of this for him. He'll kill David. David was trying to do a good thing though, right? Whenever you're harboring a grudge, it doesn't matter what good thing your wounding brother or sister does, you're going to attribute it to them as evil. Sounds crazy, right? But I'll tell you what hurt feelings do is they really blemish the way that I look at that person. I can't look at them without thinking about the hurt that they've caused, the evil they've done. And then love goes out the window. You remember a part of love in 1 Corinthians 13, he says, love thinks no evil. You look at what Paul told Timothy, another thing he said, we shouldn't be evil surmisers or thinking the worst, but whenever someone hurts us and we don't take care of it, I think the worst of them in every situation. They went on to baptize somebody, well, they may have done that, but you know what they did to me? Well, they pitched in real good at that funeral. Well, they may have done that, but you know what they're really like on the inside? Every good that they do is not going to be good enough. Because our hate will just color the way that we look at them. Love is gone. And it's replaced with that resentment that says, you'll never be good enough. You can never fix this. You will never be right. And that's what Saul looked at. No matter all that David continued to do for the kingdom, Saul resented it and he hated him for it. Don't live that way with your brethren. They're trying real hard to serve in this kingdom. It ain't always easy. They don't need someone else in their life fingers and grabbing onto their jacket trying to hold them back, serving their God the best that they can. We'll talk about some of the difficulties here in a minute. Another thing that happened with sometimes we think we can just keep it and that person hurt us, but it won't happen that way. Even the people that we hold the most dear sometimes get caught in our crosshairs. You know, Solomon made the mistake of just trying to reason with him. He didn't say, I stand with David, Dad. He didn't do that. All Solomon did is he stood there and he goes, what's he done? What is the cause that he'll be slain with? And said that Saul was upset at him. And he calls him names, and then he picks up a javelin to throw it at him, his own son. There are people never turned on, who have never done you a world of hurt, done nothing to you. And you will. Why? Because you think that they're siding with your enemy. Because misery loves a team. And it's not enough that they don't hurt. You have to make sure that they're not going to line up against you. It's one of those they hate you because they first hated him type of situations. You know, that's a weird way to put that maybe, but what we end up doing there, that paranoia, and we start feeling like everybody's aligning against us. And that's what Saul felt like. Nobody is on my side. Everybody's with him. No one sees the picture clearly. They don't get it. And what we start doing is isolating ourselves. We think everybody's turned their back on us, but really I'm the one who's turned my back on everybody else. To the point that I say, fine, if I'm not wanted here, if you can't appreciate me, I'm gone. And people take off. Oh, but they're not harboring anger, are they? Oh, but they've forgiven everything. This isn't a forgiveness issue, right? Well, Satan's won, and they followed him out the door of the Lord's church. Brothers and sisters, you can't stand against your anger when you won't forgive. We'll target anybody in our path, and he did leave a wake of destruction, did he not? The kingdom isn't the focus. I thought this was an illustration. Ian used the idea of people get rent right here in our head, that this is where they live, and that truly is what happens. We see with Saul, who was the king, he should have been the protector, the defender of Israel, that his mission was no longer Israel. His mission was killing David. That's what he lived and breathed. That's what he when he lied down at night and what he woke up for. It was an inconvenience to have to take her to the kingdom. You look at this passage, and what it starts off with is he's out there looking for David. And then they come on later and they said, look, the Philistines are here. The Philistines are coming in. So Saul, he returned from fallen David, and he went out to fight the Philistines, and his focus was the kingdom for a little bit. But as soon as he got the chance, he went right back. He went right back to following David. And talk about your overkill. And he went to... You know, you might serve in the kingdom for a little bit successfully. You might fight against, hold your breath against your rage and your anger and your grudge. But eventually it will win every aspect of your life. Now, I think of it kind of in terms where Jesus said you can't serve two masters. He was specifically talking about God and mammon in those situations. But we're either going to flesh, or we're going to serve the Spirit. Where our treasures, there will our heart be also. And obviously his treasure, his precious thing in life, had become his hatred of David. Isn't that a crazy thing to think? The thing that I treasure most will be the one most in my passion, my hobby, mission in life is to hate them. Well, we don't look at it that way. That'd be rational. And then maybe we change. But we follow that mission. And we'll serve the church in the small intermissions. But then whenever we see them again, then when the opportunity is right, we'll return back to those conversations about how hurt we've been and how awful they are. Because really that's what we set about to do in the long run, not to provide mercy, the thing that we claim to love so much, but we set out to destroy our brother, and that's what Saul did on a number of occasions. He threw spears at him. There was, I don't know, at least 3 times, I believe, that we read that he threw spears at him. He sent out assassins after him. He had plots. He tried to use his sons, his daughters, the friends, other people. He killed he had made all types of attempts to kill David. And that's what we set out to do. We're not setting out for justice. We're setting out for revenge. I ask you this, is we say we don't have a forgiveness issue, a forgiveness problem, moved on in our life, but have we really forgiven and moved on if we can't talk about someone without bringing up what they've done? I know what that's like. Say, I'm really not harboring any will in here, but then whenever I have the chance to bring up that person I'm talking about them, I can't talk about anything positive about them. I get into this situation where I've rendered evil for evil and railings for railings. I'm trying to assassinate my brother, and I feel justified in doing it because he hurt me first, just like a little kid. Well, I wonder if it had been enough for Saul if he'd actually succeeded. What if he'd actually got David in his grips and he'd put him to death? Is the problem in there? The problem wouldn't have ended, I don't believe. He'd have killed the focus of his anger, but it would still have him by the throat. Well, how about you? And you're grudging against. What if you're successful? What if you can assassinate enough in the eyes of all the brethren that nobody else looks at them in the right way again? What if you work so hard you can make them feel uncomfortable enough that they just got to leave? What if you're successful in killing your brother? Will you win? Will life be better again? Will the birds sing? Will the sun shine? No, you'll still be left with the same problem. You know why? Because you have got a mercy problem. You've got a love problem. You've got a heart problem. You've got a spiritual problem, and it only tends to death. And that still exists even when our brother is gone. We have to solve the problem in our heart. We have to fight it with mercy, or we will kill our brethren. And boy, it hurts. The other side of this, and how did someone else is that situation with David, and we'll get to in just a moment. I'll tell you one last thing before we leave Saul, is that whenever we seek out our own retribution, and I won't spend a lot of time on it because some time was spent already, as we're looking for vengeance. In Romans 12:17-19, he says, don't recompense any man evil for evil, provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, don't avenge yourselves, but rather give place unto your wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, thus saith the Lord. And I want to echo the words of Ian here, that whenever we set out to get our revenge, because that's what we're doing. If we're not seeking mercy, we will seek revenge. And some may be in the lives, one way or the other, we're going to seek it. And what we are doing, and we don't realize it, is we say to God, God, I don't think you understand the hurt. I don't think you really get it. I don't think you'll really do what you say you'll do. You're just willing to forgive this person, but you know what? I'm a justice crusader, and I will see justice fulfilled. Justice will be served, and if you won't do it now, I'll do it. And so we take a spot. We go to the Lord's throne of justice, and we say, me, sir, sit right down. Who would have to do that? You and me. That's who. And then when we do that, we're no longer the wounded. We're no longer the pitied. We're no longer the one who will be succored by God. We are now the ones who are squarely the enemy of the Lord. Because you remember that if we do not forgive our trespasses of other men, neither will our Father which is in heaven forgive us our trespasses. Do you? I hope you do. I think it's a great prayer. Do you ever Give us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Isn't that a model we were given? And that is a beautiful thought. It's a beautiful thought if I was really as good at forgiving. But it becomes a much darker and scary thought if my Lord is actually forgiving me in the way that I'm forgiving other people. No. It's a much scarier thought if the Lord is not forgiving me because of the way I'm not forgiving my brethren. And that's a whole scary world that worries me about myself sometimes. You may be wounded and you may be hurt, but fight the emotion with the Spirit. Fight it with love. Fight it with mercy. Fight it with pity. Fight it with brotherly kindness. Fight it with Matthew 18 and Matthew 5, because someone's life is about to change and not just yours. David's life, from that day forward, whenever Saul eyed David, his world was turned upside down, don't you know? Here he is, someone who says, is there not a cause? I'll fight for God. I'll fight for Israel. We're all in this together, folks. That's how we felt, right? He was a uniter. He was a fighter for the Lord. He didn't care about personal glory. He was just about doing it for Israel, doing it for us. And here, whenever this man holds a grudge against him, his world is just forever. You look at things that affected in 1 Samuel 18:11, we see another situation in 19:10 through 12. We see that David run for his life. He was avoiding out of his presence. Why? Someone's throwing a spear at him. That's Saul. Look, David fled in the night. And then just a little bit later, as he's at his house, his wife tells him, look, you got to go. You got to go. Lets him down through a window. Saul's after you. Daddy's coming, run. And I'll tell you, that's what happens. You live life on the run. Whenever someone will not forgive you, we're talking about a penitent person who says, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, I'll do better. And someone says, nope, ain't going to do it. And they're always gunning for you, looking out for you. What you do is you start watching around every corner. I love being here, brothers and sisters. I've really missed you the last couple years. Ellen just about told me if I'd schedule another meeting, I'd be here and I'd be there, just about. I walk in and like, I can't remember who said it, but they said, and I'm home. Wherever I'm at, I'm home. And I think it was maybe you, James. And that's what the church is about, that wherever I'm at, through those doors, and I'm home. And I am loved, and I'm one with everybody. And that's the beauty of the church. But I'll tell you, whenever somebody is holding a grudge against you, before you ever get to the doors, you worry what the day's going to be like. You worry about what's going to happen. Is there going to be something else that they'll perceive that I did against them? Is there going to be another scene? Do they still hate me? Isn't as fulfilling on the business meetings? They become dreaded. Fellowships, they ought to be relaxing, fun, and reinvigorating, but they're just watching, and the look on when I do it. And don't you know that's how David felt? He was a man on the run. He's always having to look out for a man who should have been looking out for him as a king should, as a brother should. And that's how you live your life as the unforgiven. That's what you do to people whenever you are not merciful. In 1 through 2, we see in the situation that the Philistines had invaded, and this might seem like an interesting deal. They're robbing the threshing floors and the cattle there and everything. And notice what David did. David didn't just go and fight them, which I would, submit to you is kind of un-David-like for the most part. But what David does is he inquires. He said, Lord, do you think I ought to go and smite the Philistines? Why do you do that? Well, you see later, because all of his men, they're going, you know what? Maybe we ought to use this as a chance to escape and get a little break from Saul for a little bit. He's been chasing us around. Let him deal with it. Maybe we should use this as a cover and go. And he's saying, should I kingdom? Because he felt that pull, right? I should preserve. Eventually, to his credit, that won out. That commitment to the kingdom won out. And for a time, it might for you. You may be able to fight the fears and the worries. You might be able to fight the trepidation that you feel about getting involved with things because somebody's upset with you. But you will become less and less involved because there is confusion. That's what strife does. I believe it's James 3:16. He says, where there is envy and strife, there is confusion in every evil work. And whenever there is strife and trouble and someone will not forgive you and you have a bad relationship with somebody else, it breeds this confusion where I go, should I do this or should I just wait and let them do it? Am I going to hurt their feelings? Are they going to attribute to this to me in the wrong way? Remember, are they going to think I'm doing this for the wrong reasons? Is this going to be just another thing they can hold against me? Should I just hold back? And so we start worrying about doing things we know we ought to do in the kingdom. Why? Because somebody's got it out for us. And we see that with David. We see another thing that there is a very real danger of, is that you might be the most penitent person in the world, and that you realize that you've hurt somebody, and I'm sorry, and I want to fix it, and I don't ever want to do that again. Please forgive me. And they say, ain't going to do it. And you say, you know what though? I'm going to spend my life dedicated to trying to show them that I love them and I didn't mean them the best I can. And time they won't forgive. You can see it. And time on, and you're doing everything you can, and they won't receive it. There is very well going to come a point in this where you go, I'm done with this. I've done everything that I can. I'm done with this. I'm done running. I'm done walking on glass all around you, so it's time for me to defend myself. And that's the point that he gets to. I mean, he feels bad about it later. His heart smote him. He rose up. He cut off the edge of Saul's robe and then immediately goes, shouldn't have done that. No, he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have. Retaliation is never the answer. But I'll tell you, we almost are pushed to it. We shouldn't have self-control. There comes a point where we in our become not the one who is the wounder, but we become the wounded. And we are very much at risk of taking on the same mentality of the one who is grudging against us and just perpetuating the fight. That's what you might push somebody to do if you're not merciful. David was a strong man. He didn't let that rule his spirit. His remorse for that was very quick, and he made that perpetuating a fleeting thing. What I would mention to you, though, is later in life, he committed some revenge himself. He smote several people. One of them, in fact, we'll mention later on. You're very at risk of perpetuating this feud. I'll tell you, the biggest thing, though, that you're putting someone at risk for whenever you won't forgive them, when you won't be merciful, is just destroying them with grief. Imagine you're David, the one that even as a boy you know who your God was and what your place is in the kingdom. It's right there serving Him no matter what happens. You have a great friend in Jonathan, a man who your heart is just completely knit together with because you're so dedicated to serving the Lord. You've got a family started. You love your wife. She loves you back. That's a good thing. You've got a place in the kingdom. You're leading people. You're fighting the Lord's battles, and then someone chooses to hate you so much that you know you're going to have to leave your home. You got to leave the people that you love. You got to leave the job that you feel duty bound to God to fulfill. And you know you got to go. What do you start doing then? When that person won't forgive you, you go, what have I done? And that's what he does here in chapter 20 and verse 1. He says, what have I done? What's my iniquity? What is my sin before the Father that He seeks my life? As he talks to Jonathan, you know what he's saying is, what have I done that's so bad? Is it that bad? Just tell me what it is and I'll try to fix it. Can it never be forgiven? Some people feel that way. We make them feel like, I can't be forgiven. I had somebody tell me one time, is there something I could do to make this situation? Nope. There ain't nothing you can do. I'll just have to get over this. You know what I left feeling? I don't know if that was supposed to comfort me, but I walked away going, so is there a chance I can be forgiven or is there not? And that's how he feels. What can I do? This is so bad. And later on, whenever he knows the questions, he's done asking the questions. He knows he's not going to be forgiven. He knows that he's just going to keep coming after him. Jonathan, that's the whole scene where Jonathan shoots the arrows. The boy walks past it. He yells, you've gone too far. And that was a sign to David. I don't know why they didn't just walk out and say, hey, it's not going to work, because they met up right after that. But that's I just can't come home anymore. It's not a safe place. Very well the last time he was going to see Jonathan. And so those two fall together and they weep with one another. Yeah, trying so hard that you just couldn't even stand. I hope not. But whenever something hurts you so bad, he's on the ground crying. I imagine they're holding one another on the ground. It said that David more exceedingly, the way that I look at that, it says he cried until he just didn't have energy. He was crying more than Jonathan. Why? Because he felt like his life was over. Wouldn't you feel that way too? What if whenever someone preached to you the gospel and you saw that there was an opportunity for forgiveness? Because I'll tell you, forgiveness is always an opportunity. We know that as Christians. But someone preaches to you the gospel and you never obeyed, and you say, just like the, you say, what hinders me to be baptized? And someone says, God reaches down, he said, nope, not you. Not you. Not you. You're convicted of your sins. You know how horrible eternity is. And that's how we feel when someone forgives us. Just tell me what I need to do, please. I'm so sorry that I did this. Sometimes I do things that I regret so badly. Sometimes things just come out of my mouth, and as soon as they come out, I go, why'd you say that? I can't believe you said that. And I wish I could get it back in, but I can't, and I just want someone to forgive me. If someone will stand there and say, I won't do it, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to destroy you, I deal with that. I'm probably but I'll tell you how we'll deal with that. Just leave. We're warned against this in the New Testament, not forgiving folks. 6 through 7, he's been talking a lot about disciplining people and trying to get them to fix their sin problem and coming back to the Lord. But he said, whenever somebody repents, look, forgive them and forgive them all the way. Because there is a dangerous consequence if we don't. Sufficient to such a man which was afflicted by many, so that the contrariwise we ought rather to forgive him and to comfort him. Not just forgive him, say it'll be okay in time. Said forgive him and comfort him. Because you're not the only one who's wounded, especially if they're penitent. They feel bad they hurt you. They actually love you. They're not your enemy. They're just human and they make mistakes. Comfort him, lest perhaps one should be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow. Swallowed up. I'll tell you, people are swallowed up by the flood of our rage and by our thirst for vengeance. Because even whenever they'd be forgiven and know it might be a steep climb back and that maybe they'll never get to the pinnacle of where they used to be in a relationship with you, to know that there is no hope, I mean, it's a hopeless situation. And you have seen it. I guarantee you, especially those who have been in the church long enough, you have seen this happen. You've seen it happen to the churches when people who have not been forgiven and welcomed back and comforted and the love of the brethren reaffirmed for them. You know what they do? A lot of times they try to stick it out. You try to stick it out. Why? Because you love your God and you want to serve Him to the best of your conscience and your ability. And you think that maybe someday they'll let me back in. But whenever time goes on and they're not let back in and they're not welcomed back in and they're not comforted and love isn't reassured and they go, you know what? I'm just not forgiven. I'm causing a problem here. I'm still a problem. I'm doing the best that I can. You know what? I'll just go. I'm not mad at anybody, but I'm tired of being a problem for everybody. I don't want to be a distraction to you as you worship your God. I know that I'm a distraction because you hate me. So you know what I'm going to do? You don't get me out of your sight. I'll do it myself. And they leave. Sometimes what I see is they don't just leave and go to another church. Sometimes they look at those situations and they're so wounded they say, I thought we believed in forgiveness. I thought mercy like our God. But here you don't, maybe you're not really the real church. You know one of the greatest apologetics that we have? It's our brotherly love. Jesus said that, right? By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you have love one for another. I mean, it is one of the greatest tools we have in using the Gospels, that people can see the way that we love and we forgive and we're kindly affectionate and we care for one another. The way that we forgive one another. And they can say, that's really God's people. They act just like Him. They're merciful. It's His mercy. But whenever you won't show them, go, maybe. And you know what? If we don't follow mercy the way it ought to be followed, maybe it didn't. See how making this physical decision, it tends to death? Not just the Sauls, but potentially the Davids in this life. The only ones affected from that day forward. Whenever Saul eyed David, it wasn't just Saul's life that was changed. It wasn't David's life. We'll spend just a few minutes, and I'll tell you that the nation was thrown into uproar. And our congregations will suffer and will be negatively impacted. Our decisions not to be merciful. An interesting story here in 2 Samuel 16, starting in verse 5 there, you have the story where David he's traveling along. This is where he's king and stuff like that. And Saul's gone at this point. David's trucking along. Then all of a sudden somebody starts cursing at him, throwing rocks at him. Here comes Shimei out there. He's like a long-lost cousin of Saul or something. And of course, he's heard all about this bad guy, David. And look at him, he's calling him, he's throwing rocks at him. He says, you bloody man, you murderer, you man of Belial. He calls him an idol worshiper. You're a man of Belial. You also worship false gods. He knows all about this David, folks. He's a bad, bad man. I'll tell you, whenever we don't forgive people, when we set out on our tour of vengeance, we set out on our backbiting and our bickering and railing on people, what we start doing is we start tainting everyone's view of them. You know, there's a reason why God said, go and tell your brother between him and him alone, right? Keep it small. I'll put it to you this way. Let's just think about it inside of a marriage. What if one day I come home from work and Ellen hasn't done all the things that I think that she should have done. We've just been married a couple of weeks, and I come in and say, supper's not on the table? Come on, woman. She may get me later just for saying that. That's never happened. Just telling you, that's never happened. What if I did that, though? And I come home and I said, why is it not on the table? And why isn't this done, that done? And she's hurt and she's crying, and maybe she picks up the phone and she calls Daddy. No. Dave, I ain't scared of him. She calls Mama. He did this and he said that, and he's a big, bad, mean man, and I've made a horrible, awful mistake. Boy, Mama has just been put in a tough position. You know why? Because her baby has been hurt, and it is a very credible source. Very well may be true. You know what? Maybe a couple minutes later after that phone call, what if I come in and say, hi, I am so sorry. I shouldn't have talked that way. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to change who I am. And maybe I do. But you know what? That thought is still in Mama's head. I'm not saying that Tanya isn't a forgiving person. She'll understand. I'm just using this as an illustration. It's just not fair. There's a reason why God says, handle this situation. Keep it small first. Let it be between you and him. If you're both merciful enough and humble enough, you're going to work it out. You're going to gain your brother. Nobody's ever going to know. Nobody's ever going to know what a big fat jerk I am. And you know what? Nobody's going to know that I did that then, but I changed later. They won't have to worry. But what we do whenever this becomes a ought, it's out, nobody's forgiving, keeps perpetuating, big couple with us, and we still can't work it out, and maybe we won't be the ones who forgive, and then it goes on, it's a bigger issue. I got 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. And we keep going, and everybody knows. And maybe some people have a heart where they've worked so hard on mercy that if I repent and I change, that they can forgive me all the way and say, it was a mistake. We all make mistakes and move on like it never happened. But you know what? That's hard for us to do. It's hard for a congregation to do. And we put the congregation in an unfair position when we will not be merciful, when we will not be loving, when we will not be patient, when we will not work out our problems, maybe to a position where we will forever look at somebody as if they're this big fat sinner. Maybe we look at them like Saul, that everything good that they do is tainted by what we know that they've done. And maybe the reasons why they're doing it again. That's how we affect a congregation in a negative way. I know that he did that for this man, Shimei. You know what's crazy? Forgives him here, says, nobody touch him. Some of his people, they said, we ought to kill this man. He can't talk to you that way. You're the king, David. And David said, no, nobody touch him. But you know, later on before he dies, he says, you know what, Shimei, go kill him. Boy, he suffered from revenge too. Maybe he didn't work it out. I don't know. Later on, he still went and sought revenge. That's a whole other can of worms, but I thought it was worth noting. I'll tell you another problem that we have inside of the church, similar to what Israel did, is the lines get drawn. This is where divisions happen. I know divisions happen over doctrine and things, stuff like that a lot of time, but where I mostly see it is the lines are drawn over whose side are you on. I thought this was interesting. Saul sitting here under a tree, and you know, this man's thrown a few spears in his lifetime, especially towards his personal enemies recently. But he's sitting there under this tree with a spear in his hand, and he's talking to his servants, his soldiers, and he said, you know what, I think you're all conspiring against me. Now, which one of you knew about the conspiracy of my son Jonathan, thought Jonathan was conspiring against him, and thought nobody was telling him about it? And here he stands with a spear. Who's going to say, oh, I knew? No, they're not going to do that. Because they know he's a vengeful and merciless man. And so nobody says anything. There's an Edomite later on. He's going to speak up and say, oh yeah, I know somebody who's helping David. And Saul says, good, you know somebody that's helping him? Let's go kill him. We'll get there. But what Saul wanted was not for people to walk that line that is righteousness and to be discerning and to smite him and anoint his head with oil as David had cried for different times. That wasn't going to be a kindness. He wanted an echo chamber. He wanted everybody around him, his brethren, to be on his team. And that's what happens. Team building happens quickly. Whenever I won't go handle my problems, you know what I go do is, hey, you know what? I'm not trying to gossip about this, and you know, I'm really not that hurt, but I just want some advice because somebody did this to me, and what do you think I should do? Well, maybe Matthew 5. Well, I don't know if we're at that point. And then I'm going to call another person. I'm going to tell them. Maybe that's an innocent way it starts, maybe. And then you have just the blatant people going around. I'm going to tell you what they did. I'm going to tell you what people in our church are doing. What this person did. And what we want is not for them to tell us, you need to calm down, we need to handle this right way, we need to make sure the divisions are. We want them to say, you know what, they did do wrong. Let's get them. We want them to get the pitchforks out. The lines are drawn inside of the church when we all ought to be the forgiven, aligned behind Jesus. We have this side and we have this side. And the battle is on. Whenever divisions happen, and especially over personal problems, it will not stay civil. And it will start impacting people. People will die. And that's exactly what happened in that situation. That Edomite spoke up, Doeg the Edomite, and he said, hey, I know about some priests. They helped out David. And Saul said, well, let's go kill him. He tells the servants, fall on them. You slay these priests. And they wouldn't do it. Who's going to kill the priests of God? Which one of us in the right mind is going to kill one of the Lord's loved? Going to turn on our brethren and kill them? I'll tell you, the ones who aren't really gods, that's who. The ones who forget their gods. Here the Edomite, he says, I'll do it. And so Doeg, he turns and he kills 85 persons that wore the linen ephod. 85 priests. That's destruction from within. If we bite and devour one another, we will be consumed one another. And that's what I saw growing up. I saw a lot of that growing up, brothers and sisters. I know of congregations right now where I grew up that had over 150 people when I was a young boy. And you know, the doors have closed twice on that building. Reopen with a few and come open again. And I'm not here to point fingers or say things like that, but I'll tell you, it's real. Churches are destroyed. They're devastated because of personal problems that will not be worked out between brothers and sisters, whenever families will not forgive and be merciful. We ravage the bride of Christ. Is this what we really want? There's some pretty singing last night and today. There's a lot of wonderful friends in this room. I hope we spend eternity together. But before that, I hope we spend the rest of our life together, serving God with singleness of heart and with gladness, sharing our homes and sharing our pews and sharing our lives. But we won't if we're merciless. We won't if we will not solve our problems. We won't if we cannot. No, if we will not forgive, we'll destroy the church. And Saul, he set out destroying his own kingdom. That's the effects it has on the kingdom. 2 Corinthians 2, 10 through 11, where we were reading earlier, he says, "To whom you forgive anything, I forgive also. For if any forgave I anything, for if I forgave anything, to whom I forgave it, for your sakes forgave I it in the persons of Christ, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." We've come full circle in this study. I started by submitting to you the same proposition that Ian gave to you, that whenever we choose to be unforgiving and merciless, that we're of our father, the devil. And I believe this scripture says it too. I believe it's backed up over and over. Someone might go back to that passage in Luke and say, well, that passage says that he was a murderer from the beginning, and we're talking about forgiveness, not murder. No, we're killing people. We're killing people whenever we choose not to forgive them and when we're merciless. We're destroying them one soul at a time, starting with our own. We're murdering. And he tells us here, we need to be forgiving. We need to let it go, just like Christ is forgiving things for our sake, lest Satan should get an advantage of us. We're not ignorant of his devices. Is being unforgiving. I don't know why I had a hard time finding the word. I've said it a lot. That's his device. That's his moment. That moment of conflict, Satan is just waiting for it. And he's going, it's my time, boys. Let's go. That's when he saddles up and he rides and he stands in your ear and he whispers out of emotion, get him. That's whenever he pulls at you. You're having this rational battle inside, you know, where you're going, God, I got to forgive, but I know the right thing to do here is to move on past this and forget about it and just love them. But that's where he lives. And he uses that. I'll tell you how he uses that. It's not just to destroy the church from the inside, but to keep people from coming in. I mentioned just briefly that the idea that our love for one another is the apologetics of the New Testament in a sense. Whenever we run people out of the church because we're not merciful or someone's not practicing mercy, you think they go quietly into the night? You think that our little communities don't know about it? You don't think that whenever their loved ones and friends ask them, why aren't you going to church there anymore? You've gone there for years. That no matter how tastefully they put it, that the point won't be driven across, well, they're just not loving over there. You know what I want to be a part of? I want to be a part of a family that loves and forgives. Boy, and we're a lot more loving and forgiving with our own blood kin sometimes who treat us 10 times worse. But I don't want to be a part of a church family where it is a scary thing to just come be at worship. I want to be with the saints who love mercy because they've had mercy given to them, who love forgiveness because it's something they've sought in their life on a daily basis from their God. To be around the people who look at me and give me the benefit of the doubt, knowing that sometimes I just don't control my spirit, do things that I regret against them, but they know that I love them and they're willing to forgive me. That's where I want to be. I want to be with you. And I want to be that person to you. Because I don't want to be the son of Satan. I want to be a child of mercy, a child of the Father in heaven. I hope you do too. I hope that you choose to focus on mercy. I hope that you choose to follow the works and the fruits of the Spirit rather than to implement the devices of Satan. You'll be blessed. God, thank you for letting me be here this morning.